Hey maker, are you trying to photograph wall decor but don't have a way to hang it up? Or maybe your product is too large and awkward to style in a small space. Today, I'm sharing one of my favorite styling tricks for wall products. Back when I sold wall decor, I figured out a super simple trick to make it look like it was styled on a wall or shelf without actually hanging it. Today, I'm showing you exactly how to pull that off as a flat lay. This is part of my full series called Start to Finish, how I shoot a styled product photo for a nursery wall sign. You can watch the entire playlist by clicking right up here or grabbing the link in the description below. In this video, I'll show you exactly how I styled this setup and how I got the framing just right. If this is your first time joining me, hey, I'm Christina Nicole, product photography coach for makers. So in the last video, I gave you a preview of all the different props that I bought for this shoot, why I bought them. I walked you through my process for developing a concept around a product. So the next step was to actually build out the set. I think I told you I went overboard with different props. I like to have variety because I like to play with things and experiment with things and give myself some options when it comes to actually styling and composing the image. So this right here is our wood board. As I mentioned, we are going to turn this and have it sit basically this way. So we had to make sure everything was attached because we're going to be shooting flat lay from above. So I tested the whole tree decal sticker that goes on the wall, and I did a test shot. You can check that out here. And I did not like it. So shooting as up close as I was shooting, the decals, the stickers, they just looked really cheap. They had a lot of bubbles underneath them that formed, even though I had flattened them out. So I just did not like them. So that's fine. I went ahead and removed them from the backdrop, and in the process, I damaged the backdrop to a certain degree. Again, while that's, sad and a little upsetting, it just pulled off some of the backdrop and certain components. I can easily edit that out when I go to edit the photo for the final image. In the process of going through building all of this out, I remembered that I had these amazing little pine trees inside of my Christmas collection boxes. So I actually went and grabbed those, threw those into the setup. I felt like they matched perfectly. We went ahead and used the little squirrel, we used the raccoon, and we used 3 of the wooden blocks as well as the bear. I just can't have the bear on here right now because it's taller than the foot hangs down past the shelf a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the actual setup as far as the composition and all of that. So the sign is basically going to kind of go about here in the center. So a lot of times to create focus on a center item, we start with height on the outside, on both sides, and we're going to basically kind of do like a stair step down, which will then lead our eye to the center. So it's almost like it's pointing to the center. So because these trees were the same heights, I had to put a little block underneath this tree and this tree. And then this tree is just attached to the wood. And then we have our blocks here and our raccoon, just kind of that final step. And then we have 2 additional just like visual elements up front. This is where we kind of knocked the balance a little bit. While we want there to be symmetry and balance in our photos, sometimes duplicating the exact same thing can be a very basic way to compose an image because it creates the same amount of weight on one side as it does on another. We don't want it to look too thought out. So I threw this little guy in over here, kind of a little pop of color, a little more texture, and then we have the bear over here that's a different kind of level. Let's talk about how I applied these. For the trees, which we did have a little bit of a problem with, I'll explain here in a minute. But for the trees, I use this Gorilla double-sided tape. This stuff sticks pretty good. I also use that on the wooden blocks. But then for the raccoon I used this, it's just almost like a fluffy, I can't remember what brand it was. But it's another double-sided tape that has a little padding to it, and it's not as sticky because I didn't want it to ruin the bottom of the product. The goal in all of this is to make sure that everything can stay intact afterwards for use again. Now the trees that we put on the block, I will say probably because of the additional weight and then the smaller block actually adhering to the wood, those ones kept tilting. They did a little better after sitting last night, like adhering to the tape a little longer. But what I did is when we go to turn the setup sideways, I created these little tiny sticks out of skewers, and I created it as the height. So then I used it just to like hold up the tree from the backdrop so that it wasn't like dangling there. And then when I went to go shoot, like actually snap the photos, I removed them quickly and then put them back in between shooting and testing different things. Couple things I want to mention that I did kind of back in the beginning. Before I started building out the props on this setup, what happened was I actually taped some dimensions. So I just pulled out my smartphone quick, I added the sign to the middle of the backdrop, and I framed out the sign the way I wanted the sign to potentially look in my photo. So how much space I wanted it to take. And based on that, I was able to calculate how much of the shelf I actually was going to utilize for the frame. So that gave me an opportunity to see how much of the shelf I actually needed to style. Because as you notice, we've got some on each side here that we did not actually style. So that was helpful. And then I also left a space for the width of the sign in the middle because I wanted to just put focus on that product. I wanted to have some elements that supported that product, but I really wanted the sign to be the star of the image. So it's good to kind of pre-plan and do that, especially since we were adhering these. Downside to adhering stuff to an actual board in this situation is it can be quite tedious to have to remove and redo placement and all of that, which I did have to do one time. So let's talk about the next step that I took and where I went from there. So after I got everything on here, I didn't measure everything perfectly because we were still in test phase. We were still getting to the point where we were making sure our composition looked good, making sure, I'm just re-adhering everything here, making sure our composition looked good, making sure that everything was framed properly. Next step was to do test shots. So what I did is I went ahead and turned this sideways, and I realized that because of the weight, the shelf was leaning, okay? So what I did is I got a clamp, and I went ahead and just clamped the shelf to the table so that it would sit upright. So this was something I went through that I had some troubles with. And then we went ahead and put our sign into the frame. We gotta put a bear on. Gotta get our bear on there. Okay. And when I did this, I got my phone, I got above it, I checked everything out in the frame. Because here's the difference. When we're visually looking at something in front of us and it looks visually pleasing, sometimes it looks different in the camera. So a lot of times things have to be either further apart or they have to be moved closer. It really just depends on how you're shooting, the type of lens you're using, all of that. So when I went to go and do the test shots for this, I noticed that my squirrel was way too far out. The bear was way too far out. and I needed to make adjustments to those. So I had to readjust the bear and the squirrel, and I brought them inward into the frame a little bit more. After all said and done and taking the photos, I honestly would have preferred to kind of move all of the elements inward a little bit more, or just tighter, a little bit tighter, so we could have got more of the trees in there based on the aspect ratio that I decided to use. But these are lessons learned. And for me personally, I didn't want to spend the time going through trying to untape and retape the trees again. So to me, every shoot is a learning lesson. I am doing this for fun. This is not a paid shoot. This is to give you guys an opportunity to see kind of my process and what I would work through. So for me, it was just, I learn every time I take product photos too. So I would have done that a little different as well. I tried the banner, didn't care for the banner that I showed you, the little banner hanging in the corner. It just seemed like too big, and the spacing between the banner elements were too much. So now that we've kind of got our test shot and we've made adjustments, this helps prevent us from taking the photo and then having to reshoot because we don't see something that we like. So I highly recommend always taking test shots and making sure all of your elements look great before you take that final photo. This set is built and the composition is dialed in, but without the right light, all that work can still fall flat. In the next video, I'll walk you through how I light this large setup when I can't get close to a window, and how you can fix dark corners, shadows, or uneven light in your own product photos. So hit subscribe and click the link below to keep watching the series. See you next time.